Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast, a conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Ephrata Community Church, welcome to our weekly podcast. We like to take time to reflect on what the Lord did this past weekend, as well as talk about other pieces of ECC life, give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look into what takes place here at Ephrata Community Church. So welcome, great to have you here. I get to be joined this morning by Pastor Dan Gulnac. Dan,
what's up?
It's always fun to hang out with you. I much prefer being on the golf course with you, but you know, podcast studio is a close second.
I was going to say, it's right there.
And Kevin would have continued our series this past weekend on being created in God's image, specifically highlighting singleness.
Yeah.
And I'm going to punt it to you in just a moment. Would love to hear some of your thoughts. In fact, you preached a few weeks ago, and I'll let you speak to how strongly this topic is from you. Like you love to minister out of this topic.
Yep.
And so really great to have you on the podcast to share your thoughts, not just from what Kevin talked about, of course, but some of the revelation the Lord has given you and how you equip and encourage and walk with others pastorally. I think that this is a topic helpful not just for those listening who happen to be in a season of life where they're single, whether they've never been married or whether there's divorce, or whether there's widowing, whatever the case, that, you know, how do you navigate well this season of life? So obviously the pastoral reality of this is really far reaching, not just for those who happen to be in it themselves, but for those who are raising children, who are in that season of life, or caring for parents who are in that type, or a parent who's in that season of life. Anyway, but Kevin kicked it off, and I loved one of his points. His framing was like, hey, the word says that we're to be, that marriage is to be honored by all, and essentially said, you know what? Given what Paul writes about singleness, singleness should be honored by all as well, and highly revered. And so, but it's a great topic, of course. Really loved how Kevin really brought the whole church into agreement. But I want to kick it to you, Dan. What is it about this topic that most, gets you excited that you wanted to preach out of it? What is it about how you've experienced Jesus in this place? I mean, really, take it away. Just run with it. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things was, if you're a regular listener to our podcast, the week after I preached specifically on the original design, wholeness in the design out of Genesis, Jim would have asked, hey, what's one thing that you didn't get to that you would have liked to? And I told him to highlight singleness greater. And there's a couple reasons for that. For the first part of it is, as Kevin rooted, Paul's words and 1 Corinthians 7, where he's like, I wish that all were as were like me, where I'm single, which is a wild statement. I think that...
What do you mean it's wild? What do you mean
it's a wild statement to think about, like, as we sit here 2025, right? I don't know how many people would say, yeah, that's my wish too.
Sure.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
How many people would find agreement with that?
Find agreement with that. And so that's why, as you read that, and from where we sit, it feels like a pretty wild statement, right? That's what I mean. But as within the arc of even church history, prior to the Reformation, the single life devoted to God, which is what Paul's leading to, right? Mm-hmm. Your ability to be solely focused on pleasing the Lord and serving Him is going to be divided when you're not single.
Okay,
right? That's what he goes on to say in 1 Corinthians 7. So, and it's interesting that prior to the Reformation, feeling called to singleness was considered to be one of the highest callings. Mm-hmm. And we can argue whether or not that's right. I think I can think of our listeners who are like, I don't actually think the Roman Catholic Church is on point with that. I don't want to go down that road. I'm just saying there was a time when for men and women, a vocational calling to singleness was considered like the highest within church. Now, my experience of the evangelical Western church, certainly over the last 100 years, would say to have a family and to be married and to pursue wholeness in that area probably has been highlighted higher for most people listening to this.
Yeah.
Their lifestyle in their lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we can, as a church, rightly so, elevate marriage, elevate families,
Right.
To the point where sometimes singles find themselves to feel like they're second class, or that they being single is, as Kevin alluded to, either an interim period to be, I don't know, survived,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
Or
Endured.
Good. Yeah. Or or a stigma
Yeah.
for which to carry. And I just think that when it comes to this conversation, what does it mean to be whole in the image of God, that there needs to be a correction.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I have a passion about it.
Mm-hmm.
As I've walked with young adults, as I've walked with people, whether they're single by choice or single by circumstance.
Yeah.
That those, and specifically those that are in seasons where they don't feel it's a vocational calling,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then also those that feel called to singleness, finding it hard to be in community within most of our churches because a lot of people don't have a framework or a mindset around the beauty and wholeness found in singleness. And so, I don't know why. I can't tell you. It's out of my own personal experience. It's just, I think out of my pastoral heart, I just really feel like we need to do a better job of highlighting this.
Yeah, sure. And I'd encourage you, if you didn't listen to Kevin's message, to go back and do that. He had a number of points on how to essentially steward that season of singleness well in a healthy way.
Excellent
and
stuff.
What is available to you because you're single, how you can really lean into more of God. So I'll leave that to you to go back and listen to Kevin. But for the sake of our conversation now, Dan, what is a point that Kevin, every message is always to some extent incomplete. There's always more that could be said on any given topic. You didn't preach this one. Of course, Kevin did. But was there a point that Kevin didn't make that you found yourself thinking, oh man, there was 10 more minutes. This is a real crucial, either like an additional, like sub point to one that was already made, or hey, keep this in mind, or one that just stands alone, that you're like, man, that's a great reality of why singleness isn't just something to endure, but actually something to find the gold in. There's precious value in singleness. And we don't want to miss this reality. Essentially, Psalm 37, dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. What does it mean to dwell there and cultivate faithfulness to God? Yeah. Is there a point Kevin didn't make that of course, putting you on the spot right now, but thinking like, oh man, this is a real beautiful reality of who Jesus is, that singleness actually positions you to experience? Yeah.
I'm going to answer your question kind of.
Okay.
So I think that I would want to say, if he had more time, I would have loved to, if it was me, more time and it was me, which again, Kevin did an amazing job, but there's only so much time. We had communion, all those things. One of the things I think I would want anybody taking away from the weekend, as well as this podcast, is that, on his third point, which is singleness is to be holy and whole in body and spirit. And looking back on what I had the opportunity to share here a few weeks ago, right? Like, if a person doesn't understand and isn't able to walk in the fullness of their image bearing and the fullness of they are created completely whole.
Right. They're not lacking anything.
No lacking in anything.
Yeah.
Honestly, you're not going to be a healthy, vibrant, married person.
Right.
If you walk into your marriage not in that place. And so I just really want to say the call to a single person is the same it is for a married person, right? From that end. And so we can experience all of the fullness of who we are and all of the fullness of who God is. Yeah. And that's not negating the reality that we are created for community, we are created for love, we are created for intimacy. Yep. And that there are people that are not single by choice who desperately desire that.
Right.
But I think there's an invitation from the Lord in those seasons to pursue your identity and your wholeness in Him fully. Yeah. And And there's always a gift, and there's a grace that meets people for that. There's a grace for the singleness in season. There's a grace for the singleness in vocation, and God, so the first shift or the mindset I'd love to see people have shifted in their hearts and their heads, by the Holy Spirit through this is there's a grace in this season, and God actually wants to conform me greater into the image of Christ and create and conform me into who He created me to be, the best version of me in this season. And so if in that sense you can embrace the fullness of singleness. Yeah. And so
the good and the bad, the pros and the cons, the comfortable and the uncomfortable.
Yep.
Like
the reality is, and rightly so, biologically as well as, socially, when we usually get married, none of us have reached that point. Mm-hmm. And marriages struggle because people are so often trying to find what's left in the gap of that journey from the other person. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'm just, for a single person, if you're listening, I say this extremely heartfelt and pastorally, like if you're in that season, there is grace for that. And the Lord is calling you to discover Him deeper and discover who you are and to experience wholeness in that area. And if you take part and you lean into that, if you desire to not be single and to be in a relationship, the type of person you will attract and the healthy and fruitfulness of the relationship that you will step into, I think will be benefited by the way you shift towards this. And so that's the one thing I would say. The other thing very quickly is I really appreciated Kevin's call to the church to invite singles into their life and to invite them into community. I think it's so important for, families and for small groups and for people like that to be like, hey, this is a person who's a brother or a sister in Christ and they're single, and make space for them in their lives and in their, because I think that the body of Christ can unintentionally push singles to a demographic rather than invite them into the fullness of family. And I have had tons of conversations with adults who were single, who were like, hey, listen, I'm not just the babysitter, or I'm not just the, whatever you want to fill in the blank. I would love to be in community. And like, if you're a family and you've got young kids, like it doesn't bother me to be invited to your house to participate in the chaos. I crave people wanting to do life with me still. And I was thankful that he said that. And I just want to encourage, the church, like, let's realize that people, whether they are by choice or vocation, are still people that need relationships. Yeah. Even if they aren't romantic relationships. Yeah. So
I appreciate your thoughts on that. Of course, we can go down a rabbit trail, and I find myself with the two conflicting questions and the boundary marking of time. Yeah. So I'm going to choose one, but not at the dismissal of the other, which is going down that rabbit trail. I want to move to contentment, which is where Kevin, of course, concluded the message, but then brought as a focal point within communion, taking communion together, remembering, of course, Jesus and the work of the cross, giving of His body, shedding of His blood for the establishment of a new covenant, with this focal point of being content. Philippians 4, Paul saying, I've learned the secret of contentment. Kevin, with humor, of course, said, I'd love to know what that secret is.
That's right.
Right? So contentment is not necessarily the destination, it's the journey. Contentment's the choice you make every day. But, and it's a little bit of a tough question. And I think, of course, to pause and say, okay, I need to choose contentment today. Yet there's a tension within contentment that you can find scriptural undergirding to say, you know what, contentment could be, you can, let me say this, you can find scriptures to justify your dysfunction. So you can look to Proverbs.
That's a tweet right there.
Yeah, well, you can. I mean, you can look at Proverbs and say, you actually deal with laziness, but you just can put lipstick on the pig and say, oh, this is contentment. I'm content.
Yes.
Like, actually you might be lazy. Actually, you're not walking in, or you're taking the faith step that God would otherwise have you take, right? Yep. So I'm highlighting attention, and I want to again, it's not an easy question, but I want to punt it to you to hear what your thoughts are. Kevin leading the church into a position of contentment, of course, is healthy and good and right.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was actually sitting there yesterday, of course, through the 3 services. We did communion. I was helping to serve, just reflecting personally of my own contentment journey, but from a care for the community, understanding the different circumstances that make up the lives of those in the room. What does contentment look like for them? Yep. And so with a little funny story, last night we were at Connect Group and Heidi, who's on our team here, she's been ministering effectively, healing from people who are dealing with sciatic nerve pain. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, well, why this, God? Kind of fun thing, but she has testimonies of God just miraculously healing people. And then she said another person on our team, I won't mention who, came to her on Sunday morning and said, I've been dealing with this pain. Can you pray for it? And in the conversation last night, I looked to Heidi. I'm like, you should have told him to be content. You know what I mean? So there's this reality of there's a healthy place of I'm choosing contentment today. Mm-hmm. There's also a real healthy place of like, I'm not settling for less than what God has purchased for me on the cross. And I'm going, and so with singleness in mind, and those who don't have the call necessarily, whether they know it or not, God didn't reveal it yet. We'll say that. And they want to be married. Yep. And they've been praying for, asking for, and doing the hard work. Like, what do we do for them? Like, what does pastoral care look like for them? How do you counsel them to be content and yet discontent? To believe God for promises in one hand, while at the same time choosing joy and worship and gratefulness to say, I'm going to milk this season for all it's worth as long as the season might go. But Lord, I'm asking for a breakthrough in this season. Yeah. Like, man, make sense of this. How do we navigate that?
Right. Yeah. I'm not going to do justice to your question.
Okay.
But
and then that's it, guys.
This is
I'm just kidding.
This is the best I can say. I think that one of my favorite theologians, which is George Eldon Ladd, coined the phrase around the kingdom, the theology of the kingdom, the already not yet kingdom. And we teach that here. Yeah. We teach that when it comes to healing, right? We see climactic breakthrough. The kingdom breaks in, somebody's back's healed, somebody's isn't. Right. And that is the tension of the Christian life in all phases. And I think contentment falls in the same category. Right. We already have, even if you are struggling with the desire for greater intimacy and, physical touch and relationship with a member of the opposite sex because you desire to be married, at the same time, you already have the ability to have a deep intimacy with the Lord, to experience what it feels like to be his beloved, to walk in the fullness of his mercy and grace, to experience his presence and greater measures of that, and to be at peace with who you are in the world and experience gratitude for all that he's given you. And so that tension of living in that already and then also that not yet is our Christian life until the consummation of all things. Right. And so I think when it comes to contentment, you said earlier, not even in this question, you said we have to make a choice or something along that line. And I was like, that's it, right? Like, it is the day-to-day choice. Like, do I have faith to walk in the confidence and the peace that comes in the already while still recognizing and contending for the not yet? And that's the Christian life for me, man. And so I don't want to be oversimplistic to those that are struggling with this, but I think that's an answer for so many of the tensions that we walk in. And so, as a single person, can you, and, for all of us that are struggling with things we're not content in, can we embrace all the fullness of what God has already given us? Right. That is access to us without having to contend and sweat and tears and everything. But I still think we're called to contend for the promises that we have faith. Yes.
Okay.
I do not yet see this, but I am believing that the Lord has this for me, and I'm going to still walk in that. And there's a way in which we can find rest, peace, and a sense of wholeness in the already while still contending in the not yet. And that feels like a that feels like a dynamic tension that never will be resolved, and that's because it is.
Yeah.
But you have to choose whether or not the not yet's going to destroy your well-being, or whether or not you can rest in the already while still contending for the not yet.
Yeah, that's really good. So to bring clarity what contentment means, it doesn't mean accepting.
No.
In the sense that like this is how it's going to be and how it will always be. That's not what contentment is. Or
no, I don't think so. I think sometimes that can be resigning.
Sure.
Right. But I think contentment for me, Kevin said his definition was thankfulness in all things with trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
So can I have gratitude and thankfulness for what I am experiencing in life?
Right.
And can I focus on that?
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the not yet, that's the trust piece.
Yeah.
Right. But he has more for me, and I do trust in him. Yeah. And that's the difficult piece, because it's actually this sounds too harsh, but I'm gonna go with it. Our lack of faith in the not yet sometimes can destroy our thankfulness in the already.
Yeah.
And that's not to be too harsh. It's just, I think if we can experience gratitude and overwhelming joy in what we're experiencing in the season that God has us in, while still trusting in all of his promises, that's where we find contentment.
Yeah.
And we still need to trust in what's not yet for all of us.
Yeah.
Because there is something better.
Yeah.
Hebrews talks about that. There is a better rest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, and like I said, I think it's healthy to name the tension and not have to solve it, because that's the human experience.
Yeah. I think the exercise that Kevin led us through, I call it an exercise, but it's really a discipline of pausing and choosing to identify areas where you can be thankful.
Yep.
Because it's easy for us to fixate on the areas where we're not experiencing God's best. And I don't want to even file it all under a discontentment because of a 21st century first world. Everybody's got a new vehicle. I need a new vehicle. I'm not talking about that.
Yeah. Nope.
Nor do I think Kevin Holy was talking about that categorically, like altogether. It was more of a, there are legitimate things that it is right to be discontent with, because Jesus purchased something on the cross
for sure,
for you to walk in, be it freedom, healing, deliverance, peace, right? We do not accept less than what Jesus purchased. Psalm 103, forget not any of his benefits.
That's right.
Right. So I am keeping top of mind the benefits that Jesus and the covenant through his blood purchased for me. Yet while I wait for the fulfillment of those things, be it I die and I'm with him, or it manifests here on this side of eternity, I'm choosing contentment in the sense that I'm thankful for, I'm going to pause and enlist. And that's what I found myself doing.
Yeah.
There, it was so healthy to just pause and be like, wow, I am praying for these things. God, would you do that? I'm setting that list to the side for a moment and just saying, thank you for this. Thank you for this. And what came as a fruit of that was just hope and peace. Yeah. Like, man, the future looks brighter than it did 5 minutes ago.
For sure.
Do you have any
so good
reflections on that?
No, I think for me, I have to use my holy imagination. And so not only with gratitude, but one of the things I regularly do, and I'm closing my eyes because I'm just imagining myself do it, is I can actually picture the relationship or the thing that brings discontentment. And I just take it in my hand and I just lay it at the cross. Yeah. I just lay it at his feet. Because I trust him. Yeah. And it's his to carry. In fact, he already did carry it. Yeah. And when I do that, when I lay down those things to him and I embrace all of the things he's already given me, there's a different sense of where I get to in my soul. And it's just so easy to hold on to all of those things that you haven't laid down, and you miss what you already have in your hand. And, and so it's a good practice, and we can find contentment there. And contentment is not resignation.
Right. That's such an important distinguishing, that when we say we are inviting you into contentment, it doesn't mean that you stop asking for God's breakthrough. Yep. It means that until then, I'm not going to lose my joy in who my God is and my connection to him. And that is really important. distinguishing of terms. Lamentations chapter 3. I'm going to bring this time to a close. Man, Beautiful. It is not difficult to spend a lot of time with you, Dan. There's the verse that many people are familiar with, which is, in Lamentations 3, it says, the mercies of the Lord are new every morning, great is his faithfulness.
Yep.
The first half of that verse actually is one that growing up, I never heard quoted connection to it. And so it wasn't until I was reading my Bible one day, and I'm like, wait a second, there's more to this verse.
That's right.
Where it says, this I recall to mind, therefore I have hope. Mm-hmm. And the discipline of pausing and recalling to mind what God has done, who he is, and that being a precursor to his mercies are new every morning, great is his faithfulness. It actually begins with, I'm going to pause, recall to mind, the fruit being, therefore I have hope.
Yes.
If you're lacking hope in your life, I'd encourage you, this discipline of contentment, thankfulness, gratefulness is really critical to renewing hope in a God whose mercies are new every morning. You can experience who he is as you just pause and say, I'm going to recall to mind who my God is and what he's done.
So good.
I don't want to miss that. And so thank you, Kevin, for the message.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan, for your time and your brilliance in all things.
But thank you. I think that this is a great series. I'm excited for this weekend. I get to be service pastor this weekend, and Mark and Amy Calkins are going to be speaking specifically about the partnership of men and women in the kingdom. And awesome. Not only do they have the knowledge, but they actually embody it.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a gift to our congregation.
Yeah, Mark and Amy are great. If you don't yet know them, we're excited for you to experience their ministry this weekend. Marcus and Amy both have done connect groups and growth groups here at ECC and ministering in different capacities. So looking forward to that. Thanks, Dan. Thank you all for tuning in. We look forward to connecting with you this weekend and next week on our podcast. And until then, God bless.
Bless you.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us at effortacommunitychurch.com.